In Exploration 2, we're going to look at the structure and function of carbon-based molecules. Now, carbon-based molecules are also referred to as macromolecules, so you might hear either one of those terms. But there are 4 basic macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Pretty much all living things are composed of combinations of these 4 molecules. So let's look at what they are. First of all, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now, when we think of carbohydrates, typically what we think of are sugars. Different combinations of carbohydrates are going to form different types of sugars. And as we talked about in the last exploration, all of these macromolecules are what we call polymers, meaning they are chain-like structures that are made up of smaller parts. Now, in a carbohydrate, the individual chain link structure is called a monosaccharide. All right. The monosaccharide refers to a single carbohydrate ring. Now, there's a couple different types of rings, but one ring is called a monosaccharide. And depending upon how those rings get combined, determines what type of carbohydrate we're looking at. And again, lots of different carbohydrates that are out there. Several of them are very important for storing energy, and some of them are important for structural things, like cellulose, for example. Cellulose is a very important carbohydrate in plants because cellulose forms the main structure of the cell wall that gives plants their shape. But again, carbohydrates are primarily for energy storage. When you bring carbohydrates into your body, they are going to be used to store the energy that you need. All right. That's why when people say you got to carb up, they're telling you to do that because the food that contains energy are those carbohydrates. Okay. Now, the next structure we're going to talk about are lipids. All right. Lipids are kind of like carbohydrates in that they have some similar functions, but they do a lot of different things. Now, lipids are what we call non-polar, meaning they don't dissolve in water. If you think about a carbohydrate, like a piece of bread, for example, if you throw a piece of bread in the water, it's going to get soggy and eventually fall apart because carbohydrates dissolve in water. But lipids do not. When you put some kind of lipid, which is another name for fat, in water, you're going to see them both at the same time. Like, this is where the phrase oil and water don't mix come from, because lipids do not break down in water. Now, this is important because lipids are used to form membranes a lot of times. And one of the important membranes that we're going to look at is the cell membrane. So keep that in mind. Now, lipids, again, have lots of different jobs. Some of their jobs are to store fat. Others of them are to make membranes. Still, other lipids are involved with heat preservation. Okay, your body uses fat as a way to store and insulate so that it can help you maintain homeostasis when it comes to heat. But this is a good picture that I want to talk about for just a second. This is a picture of the cell membrane. Now, we talked about the cell membrane a little bit when we went over parts of the cell, and we'll cover it a lot more in Exploration 4 of this unit. But I want to show you this picture because you can see this structure right here that kind of looks like a head with 2 legs, or a tail in this case. This is called a phospholipid. And what a phospholipid does is it kind of orients itself to where the head version is on the outside of the membrane, the tail version is on the inside. And what this does is it creates a dual layer membrane that makes it a little bit difficult for water to pass through because water is a polar molecule, but remember, lipids are non-polar, so they're not going to be attracted to that water. In the cell membrane, we'll talk about a little later on, it's going to be important, therefore, to have these proteins built into it so that certain things can pass through the membrane and in or out of the cell. All right. Let's talk a little bit about proteins. We're going to go on to the next structure. Proteins are often described as the building blocks of life. What does that mean? Well, a protein is actually another chain-like structure, another polymer. And when we talk about a protein, what we're really talking about is a string of amino acids. Okay? There are 20 different amino acids, and when you combine them in different ways, you can make all of the proteins that your body needs. And your body needs all kinds of proteins for all kinds of reasons. Proteins serve as enzymes, they serve as structural components, they let you repair things. It's very, very important. Your body is constantly making proteins. So once again, the polymer would be that protein, and the individual chain links of that polymer that we call the monomer, those would be, in this case, the amino acids. All right, now we will talk a lot about protein synthesis in our unit about DNA, because the process of making proteins is kind of complicated, but it's actually really, really cool. Now, proteins are going to link up, like I said. So these are your amino acids, these blue circles right here. And when you combine them in a specific order, you're connecting them through peptide bonds. Now, one of the cool things about a protein is they can actually fold up on themselves into different structures. So right here is a good picture to show you that. Your original protein chain is going to look like kind of a necklace with a bunch of beads on it. But the necklace is going to want to fold based on attractions of those amino acids. So it's going to fold and they're going to connect in these specific places. And each combination of amino acids is going to fold in a slightly different way, creating a slightly different structure. In fact, it's going to make 4 different structures. So there will actually be 4 levels of folding that go into this process of making a protein. And it all starts with this single long chain of amino acids. Now, as we talked about before, proteins are susceptible to changes in temperature or pH. If you expose this protein to a large amount of temperature or pH, then all of these little connections will break and your protein will fall apart. Okay. Now, the last macromolecule that we're going to talk about is a nucleic acid. All right. Now, a nucleic acid, again, is a polymer, meaning that it is a long chain-like structure. Each chain link in that polymer is called a nucleotide. All right. So the nucleic acid is the long chain. A nucleotide is a single chain link. Now, again, we will talk a lot about nucleic acids in our unit on DNA, but I want to introduce to you their basic structure and function. Nucleotides are composed of 3 parts: a phosphate, a sugar, and then a nitrogen base. So those 3 components kind of make up that chain link, and then all the chain links link together to form DNA and RNA. Now, I'm hoping you've heard of these 2 terms before. If not, again, we'll go over them a lot next semester. But DNA and RNA form the basis of our genetic code. Nucleic acids are information carriers. They give the instructions for how to make all of the proteins that your body makes. They give the instructions for how to carry out all of the processes that your body carries out. And so these nucleic acids are very important for holding the recipes for everything your body needs. Here's kind of a picture of that structure. So you can see these are the individual chain links over here. And when you combine them together, they're going to form these spiral structures. Now, the one on the left is DNA. The one on the right is RNA. And again, we'll talk a lot more about these 2 structures in our next unit. But for now, what I need you to know is that nucleic acids are made up of nucleotides, and they contain genetic information. All right, so that's it for this unit.